Hi, I'm Rachel Shelton. I'm a faculty member at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health. And I'm going to talk today about some examples from public health and other types of studies that have focused specifically on sustainability. So one study is from Saunders and colleagues from 2012, and they really had a nice focus. It was one of the earlier studies on sustainability at the school level. So LEAP was a school-based intervention that addressed change in both the instructional practices at the school level as well as the school environment with the goal of promoting physical activity among high school girls. And they did a really nice job of, a priori identifying what the 10 required and 6 recommended elements or core components were. And then interestingly, they also did encourage some adaptation based on what the school capacity and culture and resources were. They had a champion, they had ongoing training and technical assistance to really think and plan and be mindful about, again, improving the fit and enhancing implementation and sustainability. And what they found in some of their implementation trials was that there was more physical activity in the intervention groups, and that there was higher levels of physical activity in schools that had higher implementation. So there was kind of a dose relationship there. And they found that they did a follow-up looking at the sustainability of the intervention effects 3 years after the intervention was delivered and implemented. So I just want to give you here a sense of kind of the specificity with which they're identifying, again, the different components of the intervention. So there was the school environment component and the instructional practice component. And again, they identify what are those essential elements that had to be in place during the active intervention for it to count as kind of being implemented. And they identify those in a nice, very highly specific way. Things like, was there community agency involvement? Was there health education reinforcing the messaging? Were there gender-separated PE classes, et cetera? And then they said, okay, in order for this to count as sustainability, at the follow-up period years later, these are the essential elements that we say have to be in place in order for it to count. So again, that's always a key question. What counts as sustained? Does it have to be the whole program? Is it certain components? So again, they did a nice job of really specifying which of these components needed to be in place for it to count in the sustainability assessment. So again, they define sustainability as the continued presence of these essential core components at follow-up. So it had to include both the school instructional practices and the school environment. And again, they had to have evidence for implementation at 2 time points. So both at the end of the active intervention and at the 3-year follow-up. So they have the time component in there as well. And again, they had a multi-source approach to data collection. So they interviewed the LEAP team members, former PE teachers, students, and they also did observation of both the PE and the school environment. And again, for the evidence of implementation or sustainability at the follow-up period, they used triangulation of data from multiple sources. And they said it counted as sustained if 60% or more of the essential core components were present, including at least one essential element from both instructional and environmental categories. So again, I love the specificity with which they approach the definitions. And they really said what actually needs to be in place for this to count as sustained. That's rare. And they found that at the 11 schools at the 3-year follow-up, 5 schools had 7 to 10 elements present. 1 school had none, and overall 4 schools met the criteria for sustainability, which is pretty comparable to what you find in the general literature. And again, schools with sustainability, they did look at the health continued impact on behavior. So schools with sustainability had higher physical activity levels at follow-up. So again, I think this is a great example of some of the measurement issues. Another great example of a study looking at sustainability has been Dave Buehler and colleagues' work looking at the sustainability of Go Sun Smart 5 to 7 years after program dissemination. So this was an occupational sun safety program. They were studying this in ski resorts across the U.S., and it was a follow-up to a randomized control trial they had done to compare they'd done a cluster trial to compare different dissemination strategies. And, don't focus too much on the basic dissemination strategy versus enhance, but just to say you can see over time there were 9 or more components of this intervention. And in the kind of immediate post-test area, you can see that there's much higher levels of people having, 1 to 3 or 4 to 8 components. But over time, at the 1 to 2 year follow-up, you see that really starts to drop off. And then, there's very, very, very few that have 9 or more in place at the 5 to 7 year sustainability assessment. So this is really interesting how it kind of charts over time. Not only the extent of sustainability, but the extent of sustainability for all these various components. And what they found is that Go Sun Smart demonstrated modest sustainability 5 to 7 years after its distribution. What they found was that a lot of the intervention communication and kind of the organizational culture around that had declined or diffused some, and managers really held weaker attitudes about the program over time. So it was a little bit less present. And one of the key factors they found that seemed to contribute to its discontinuous at resorts was manager turnover and attrition. And this is a huge issue across this literature. And it suggests that really a certain level of organizational sustainability and stability is necessary to increase the odds of program sustainability. And in some of our work, what we have been doing is studying the sustainability of lay health advisor programs for breast and cervical cancer screening among African American women. So this is a program called the National Witness Program. It's been in place about 25 years nationally, has a huge impact, and is one of NCI's research-tested intervention programs. So they've really been my community partners over the past 9 years, and we've had some great opportunities to work together to understand issues of attrition of interventionists and lay health advisors, as well as issues of program sustainability. So I won't go too much into the methods, but just to say, we've done some mixed methods research that I'll present, and they've been mostly prospective studies where we'd followed them over time. This first study, we had about 8 sites and 76 lay health advisors from across the country. And this first study was in implementation science. We had the similar issue to Dave Buehler, where we had huge attrition. About 40% of lay health advisors who were trained were then dropping out of the program. And this has huge issues for program sustainability. So we wanted to understand what factors actually predict sustainability of lay health attrition levels and retention of lay health advisors. So we had a whole model based on some of our earlier qualitative work that we then later tested. We followed lay health advisors over about a 2-year period, and we found huge levels of variability. So some women were doing, completely inactive, doing 0 sessions, and others were doing up to 35 educational sessions per year. But at the end of the day, about a third of them were dropping out of the program altogether. What we found is that the biggest predictor of whether or not lay health advisors remained active in the program or dropped out was whether or not they were based at a site that had a strong academic partnership with either a cancer center or an academic center or university. So LHAs from non-academic sites, so just community standing sites, had a 80% decrease in the odds of being active or retained than lay health advisors from academic sites. And we went back, and a lot of them didn't have the organizational infrastructure, so the stipend, the space to hold trainings, the steering committee, or a physical space for the program. So this suggests that forming partnerships with academic centers really may help buffer some of the challenges that community-based programs find with respect to kind of unstable funding or just challenges in terms of keeping programs afloat. We also found that the longer women were in the program as lay health advisors, the more likely they were to drop out, suggesting that a lot of women may need kind of ongoing support, and whether it's financial recognition through stipends, whether or not a lot of these programs are often volunteer, when that's not possible, is it community or social recognition, but some kinds of incentives or recognition seem to be critical. We also found that if they had a clear expectation of what their role involved, they were more likely to still be involved at follow-up. So trainings are a nice opportunity to make sure that volunteers or trainees are really clear about their role expectations, and providing them with opportunities to increase self-efficacy through training and feedback, because role self-efficacy was another critical factor of whether or not they remained involved. We've also done some qualitative work with this group. This was published in Translational Behavioral Medicine, where we wanted to take some of the factors that we've learned from the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, the CFIR, and see if some of these outer contextual factors, inner contextual factors, processes, and both interventionist and intervention characteristics matter in terms of program sustainability. So we started with these large buckets, and then we used qualitative research to understand what some of these factors might look like that would be specific to sustainability. And again, I won't go into all the detail of the quotes and findings. But again, we found that at the outer contextual level, in addition to kind of the external funding availability and resources, that again, these partnerships with community-based and academic organizations were critical. So to really being able to sustain the program. So whether or not that was providing access to low-cost mammographies or referral networks or diagnostic follow-up or support groups, again, they provided the resources needed to keep the program going. In the inner organizational context, we found that program champions and supportive leadership were critical, particularly the director at the local level, who was critical in creating the contacts and the connections and really providing the emotional support for the nature of this work, and often also helping to negotiate the space, the financial incentives. So that person, that leadership, and the program champions within that were seen as critical. Witness uses a train-the-trainer model. So a lot of people thought that the sustainability of the program was partly also contingent on using these train-the-trainer model opportunities to develop kind of this volunteer powerhouse that kept going, where people on the site were able to train others. The characteristics of the lay health advisors, who were the interventionists, were also critical. So their passion and commitment, their motivations, the benefits they got from it were really, really critical. So we found that a lot of them initially joined the program with the desire to give back to the community and contribute. And many of them had experiences with cancer themselves or for their family. But we found that what kept them in the program, what kept their motivation and passion, was often the development of new social networks and the emotional support from other lay health advisors and from leaders in the program that they got through the program. Particularly for the cancer survivors, this was critical in maintaining their involvement in the program's sustainability, as well as the sense of empowerment and leadership and new skills that they develop through the program. And we've done other work that has shown how they apply these to other areas of capacity building and leadership in their communities. And then the characteristics of the intervention. So what's so unique about this program is that it was developed by African-American women for African-American women. So it clearly fits an unmet need in their community. And again, it really fits with often the organizational mission of the organizations where they were based, whether they were churches or departments of health, with a focus on health equity and addressing health disparities. We found that about 60% of the sites in the past 5 years experienced periods when they couldn't offer programs. So in a sense, they were non-sustained. But this was actually quite dynamic. But again, a lot of the barriers related to funding, limited national leadership, limited opportunities for building and evaluation, LHA burnout, and organizational infrastructure. But there were facilitators in terms of, again, the organizational partnerships, the champions, both at the local leadership level, and the commitment of the lay health advisors. And then again, just the powerful role of cancer survivors in the program and the program's fit in addressing a need for the African American community. We took this and developed the Lay Health Advisor Sustainability Framework, which now we have an American Cancer Society grant where we're testing this among a large national sample of 20 sites, 270 lay health advisors and leaders across prospectively using mixed methods over 4 years. So we will be excited to report back on that. And one interesting thing that's emerged from this is really this de-implementation issue. So then once we have something in practice, as the evidence base changes, as it has for Pap screening and mammography screening recommendations. How do programs adapt in community settings to new guidelines? What are the barriers and facilitators to that? And we've started to already learn a little bit about that. Originally, a lot of them were doing breast self-exam, and there's been a real barrier among the attendees of the program of not including that. So some really interesting issues around medical mistrust of guidelines, and we hope to be contributing to that literature and implementation science as well. And here we are at our last event this summer. So thank you.